everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Keeping It Behavioral, where we're empowering parents one episode at a time and breaking down behavior analytic topics to what they look like in the real world. My name is Ray Trank, and I'm joined by my beautiful co-host,
Justine Cardoza. Today we have another very special guest, the author of What If It's Not Broken? This is Kassi Bogolin. Yes, she is.
Hi, how are you?
We
Thanks for
are
having me.
so great, and thank you for joining us. So just a little bit of background information on Cassie. She is a retired teacher from St. Louis area who holds a master's degree in educational administration and special education, along with graduate certificates in autism studies and trauma. Her work under the KB Protocol brand, which is the brand used to write this lovely
Yep,
book that she
yep.
created, extends far beyond just the book that we're going to be talking about today into children's books, journals, and coloring books, all aiming at filling gaps in social emotional learning materials. A really important resource out there for those who are on the spectrum. So, Cassie, thank you so much for being here with us. Can you just give us a little bit of insight into what inspired you into going into creating the KB Protocol brand and more specifically the What If It's Not Broken book, and just tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Well, first, I just want to say thanks for having me again because I, I was a little bit concerned when we first decided that we were going to do this because I didn't know that our philosophies were going to align so good. And then when I started, getting to know you guys through the podcasts and stuff, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing because I'm not an ABA person. That's not where my philosophy came from. And yet, look at how we're going to be able to blend our thoughts and
Right.
our feelings together and do what's best for kids. And I love that part. So I just want to say thank you very much for having me, and let's get started.
yeah.
Awesome. We're
Oh my
so
goodness,
glad to
so
have
excited.
you.
Yes, your book is amazing. I know we kind of talked about this before we hit record on this, but Justine and I, we loved it. It's interactive, it's easily digestible. For those who haven't read the book, What If It Isn't Broken? It's such a good book. Like I just feel like this is such a
Yes.
great place to start for families who are trying to figure out how do I even develop my philosophy on
Right.
supporting a child? Where do I even start? And I feel like you do such a beautiful job of breaking that down and the interactive pieces at the back of the book too.
They're great. All of the
Oh
activities, I
my
was like,
gosh.
oh, this is amazing. I'm going to use this. I'm going to use this. Everything was just like a light bulb in my head
Yes.
when I was reading it. So I also wanted to give you that kudos because I love that you're like, I'm
Lovely.
going to give you this information and let me give you different activities and tools to digest the information and really understand it and see the perspective of someone who is neurodivergent. And I just thought that was really amazing.
And I do think it is a jump off point for families who are just now
Right.
saying, "Oh my gosh, I think that there's something going on," and
Yeah.
somebody's mentioned autism, and I know that word, but what does it mean?
Yep.
And how is that going to affect my child going into regular public school or even any kind of classroom? How is that going to make me? Um, how am I going to get information? And
Yeah.
that's the jump off point for this book, really. And then um, it just leads so beautifully into what you guys are doing with your podcast and how you're training parents and expecting them to get information from you just from their podcast. And I loved that part. I thought it was a real good lead in, project for that and how we just kind of flowed together.
Yes,
Yeah.
we do. Well, I mean, and kind of like what Justine was saying about the questions at the back, it makes it also personal. And I
Yeah.
think that that's also a big mission of ours is how do you take the information I'm delivering you and apply that to your own personal journey and experience? And you do such a beautiful job through the examples, through like the questions at the back to guide
Yeah.
families and
Hmm.
making it apply to their life. And so I guess that kind of, as we're talking about your journey and what, kind of inspired you to get here, so you spent your career in a classroom before you started writing this book and kind of beginning all of this. So
Hmm.
what was the moment, or maybe even if it was a student or experience that you had that made you realize that the system was asking the wrong questions?
Well, I've had several students throughout the years, but since I'm a retired teacher, but I did have two students who I thought really um, we did not do the right, not that we didn't do the right thing, but that I saw areas that we could do so much better. And it is really comes down to that part of the idea that classroom teachers are not being given the right tools
Yep.
to work with these students. And I saw something today, and I thought how how wrong it was, because it said it's not fair for the teacher, and the teacher was standing leaning down to a student who was having a meltdown in the
Mm,
classroom, and how it wasn't fair to the other kids in the classroom that the teacher had to stop for that one.
mm,
And I my thoughts on that were, and maybe I hope I'm answering this question with this example. My thoughts were, if that teacher had had the right tools and we had prepared her or him for that with XYZ, it wouldn't be a stop. It would be
yeah,
a natural progression of what needs to happen within the regular classroom. And so that was kind of what started my thought process, is that how can I help parents and educators to look at what neurodiversity means in and get a better grasp of that. And I don't have all the tools in here, and I don't have all the answers, but if you can look at it from a different view, and
yeah.
just say to yourself, oh, now I understand that everybody can fit into one place as long as we work at that and
Yeah.
do that inclusion thing together. And that's how I really got started.
And that's beautiful. And, I think this is actually, it's an interesting tie-in because, in a recent interview we did with Aria Dean, we were talking about the power of a ripple effect. And
Yeah.
I think
Hmm.
kind of what you're talking about here is the power of a ripple effect. When we provide people with tools, when we take the time to educate the educators, we educate the families, provide everyone with support, we're able to do better because we're able to show up better.
Right.
So I think that's really inspirational that that is your springboard for the all the
Mhm.
resources that you've been creating. I think that's fantastic.
And I really resonate with compassionate care. You
Yeah.
guys use that wording in one of them. I don't remember which one. But you were talking about how, you know, the history of ABA and the history of other um, um, kinds of therapies. Um, we just have to learn. We've learned so
Yeah.
much through history, not just with autism, but let's look even farther back to, when we how we would dealt with kids with um, uh, other things, and we put them in institutions, and then we learn these kids can learn. They
Yeah.
shouldn't have been there 100 years ago or 150 years ago. And so
Right.
now we're looking at it and we're saying, there is room for us all to come together with my thoughts, your thoughts, and we can gel, and we can make that happen in a better way for all of the all, educators, parents, the kids, therapists. All of those
Yeah.
people can be better because we're coming together and sharing what we do.
Absolutely. And that's something we've talked about a couple of times across some of our episodes too, is just what we call like a holistic approach to care. So like making sure that we're all on the same page and still using the same strategies to support whoever it is that we're collaborating with. And it's just really so important that the parents are pulled in on that too, because we want to make sure that what we're doing and the strategies that we're using and the perspective that we're able to take, parents are able to understand that perspective too. Because a lot of times I think there's a little bit of a pressure put onto parents of, oh, my kiddo needs to fit into this box and be able to go to school. My kiddo needs to be able to sit in a classroom and not be able to get up and move their body every other 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And that adds a lot of pressure to parents, and that leads to effects on their mental health. Like we were talking about that ripple effect. And we just want to make sure that we're servicing the kiddos and we're providing the need and the support to the families as a whole, and not just specifically the client or the kid or the student that we're working with. And I think that's just another great part about what this book really does is it shifts the narrative and the perspective, and it helps parents get a perspective that doesn't feel like, oh, like this is the end, everything is going to be hard trying to fit into this box. It's like, hey, you can let me give you the strategies to see this in a different light, and then you can teach others how to see this in a different light, and you know how to advocate, because we were also talking about advocacy in that last
Mm-hmm.
interview with Aria Dean. And I think it's just beautiful how all these things are tying back in together and just really trying to support getting those on the spectrum and anyone who's neurodivergent support and acceptance in a world that has been really stringent in the past. And I just love how the message of that book comes through in every chapter. So I just think it was beautiful writing, truly.
Oh, thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
very much. But I do want to go back just to your podcast because one thing that I noticed that you guys really did was break down into little pieces of information. And it wasn't overwhelming to sit here for 90 minutes and listen to you talk about it. It was just a quick 30 minutes. Here's a little bit snippet. Could take it away, think about it, chew on it, and then go to the next one. And parents of kids, and I know you've talked about this already, but parents of kids, they're so you talked about in one of the episodes about being overwhelmed and discouraged. And I think that that's what's beautiful about what you guys are doing and how you're doing it, because it just gives them a little bit of information to chew on, take it home. Okay, now I can go back and I can listen to the next one. And I loved that. I love that about the podcasts,
You're so
truly.
sweet. Oh my
Oh, it
gosh.
was so good. I was just so happy with them. I mean, I was just like taking notes, and
Oh my
thinking
gosh.
about
So
all
nice.
the things that no, seriously, just some of it was for me reminders about things, but at the same time, I was really interested in the one about PDA, the pathological demand avoidance.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was like, I have notes from that, because I thought this is so good for parents. And in my next book, that it's kind of a follow up to the this one that I've done. I talk specifically more about cases that, I obviously not talking about the child itself, but what an experience that I had with a student or a kid in therapy that uh, I lost my train of thought, but that well, I'm doing more like experiences and how to I handled them so that parents and teachers can caregivers whoever can look at those and say oh, I never thought about doing it like that, let me try
Yeah.
that, or and that's how you start to learn to challenge yourself to do better,
Yep.
Mhm.
because you think you get stuck sometimes. I know parents, especially if they don't have a lot of experience, they get stuck thinking there's only one way to do something, when we know that there's so many opportunities and so many things. I loved when I was teaching to sit down with the people that I worked with at the end of the day. And I worked in a preschool who was doing ABA, but they were not trained to do ABA, which was very, very scary.
Mhm.
And they thought they were very good at it. And I was concerned about some of it. But when you see that they're trying so hard for these kids, and even you want to make sure parents know what the right thing is. And that's what's great about the podcast. I guess I don't know where I was going with that, but
You
anyway.
know what? But it was all sweet. So
It
thank you.
was.
You're so kind. Justine, do you want to go into her brand?
Yes. So we would love to know more about, what inspired you to come up with the KB protocol brand, and like what does that mean to you, and what are you hoping for it to stand for as it grows bigger and more people learn about it?
Well, it was just a way for me to get a book out there and not use my name in case it was really bad. No, I'm teasing. No, I really had in my mind, and I don't know that I stand by this so much now, because I see the work that people are doing like you guys are doing. And it says, I don't know if I necessarily need a protocol now, but at the time when I started thinking about what would my brand look like if I were to go out into the world like Skinner and say, I believe these things and I'm going to do tests and I'm going to do experiments and then I'm going to come up with a brand or a protocol that will help parents move and teachers and educators and caregivers move forward in um in the idea of neurodiversity. And so that's how I really got started, was thinking about years ago, thinking about what would it look like if I wrote the book, if I made
Yeah.
up the rules for
Love
this. And it wouldn't be this harsh thing over here. It wouldn't be this only this way that comes from over here. It would be all of those things put together. And look where we're
Yeah.
at. Look what we're doing. We're doing
Right.
it. You and
It's
I are doing
approachable.
it. And
Yeah.
that's what's so cool about it. So that's what my thoughts were when I started with KB Protocol and what I was thinking about. And the neurodiversity book was just the beginning of what I thought would be a series, and it still is.
Yeah.
I think it's evolved into something a little bit different now than what my thoughts were, even 2 years ago when my book came out. You know what I mean? It's
Which
all
is beautiful,
evolving.
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And I think that that's kind of the piece of what you are tying together through your messages. We're constantly doing better, right?
Yeah.
It's not a destination that you reach, it's an active process.
No,
Yeah.
I think
exactly.
that that's incredible. And I think what's amazing about having books like this out there is it's making something that is overwhelming approachable, because like
Yeah.
you're talking about, like Skinner, you have these big names out there who, okay, is the content informative and helpful and obviously has inspired a whole field? Yeah, absolutely. But it's not disseminated in a way that
Mhm.
it is digestible and consumable to the person that it most affects,
Right.
which I think that's
Right.
problematic in itself, right? Like the science that is serving the people should be digestible to those who are receiving the services or are impacted
Hmm.
by it.
Right.
So I think it's amazing that you're challenging that status quo by coming up with your own protocol in a
Right.
way of
Hmm.
challenging that and making it so that everyone can access that information freely. I think that's really, I think a lot of that is so unique and special, and a lot of people aren't doing that. So
Yeah.
I just want to
Right.
give you kudos for that. Which actually kind of brings me into the title.
Hmm.
So it's very bold, right? And it challenges the way that a lot of people would approach intellectual differences, autism. Um, you know, what did that feel like when you chose that as the title? Was it scary to you? Was it
Yes.
liberating? What were your thoughts there?
Yes. It was scary because at the time that and it's been in the works for a while, like probably that the title was probably the very first thing that came to the protocol is, what if it's not broken? And the thing is that, and you talked about this in the podcast, you're not going to fix autism. I mean, it's not fixable. It's not like you can give it a pill and it goes away.
Yeah.
It's something that, um and the same thought process when I talk about neurodiversity. It's not, it's something that we have to, um accept. And I don't even know that accept is the right word terminology for it, but people with differences are living lives now, and they are living good lives, and that's because people like you guys are providing opportunities for people to learn, the parents to learn, the students to learn. And then they're going out in the world and we're saying, hey, you know what, that girl that was in second grade who couldn't speak and didn't have verbal cues, now she's graduating from fourth grade and she says she's going to Europe when she's in high school. I mean, we're doing it. It's
Yeah.
happening. And so that's, when I started, I really wanted to provide hope for parents that it's not broken. Your child is
Yeah.
not broken because they use the word autism at the doctor's office for the very first time, and they want you to get some more information, and they want you to go to speech, and they want you to do a sensory class. That doesn't mean it's broken. And that
Yeah.
was my thought behind that. A child is not broken. A child is someone that we can develop. Every child, this is my philosophy from years ago. Every child is gifted. We just have to find out how, and
Yeah.
we have to cultivate that. And that was always my mission. And sometimes it wasn't popular because it didn't fit the norm and it didn't fit inside the box.
Yeah.
But I did it anyway, because I knew that that was the best thing for the child.
And
And
that's
in the
Makes
end,
me emotional. It makes me a little emotional
I
because
know. She's like a pioneer, and that's what's
yeah,
needed. It's people like you who have gotten us to this point because it took someone to be like, "Hey, let's try something different because this is not working in this situation." That led us to finding all these things, to learning about how to do assent-based care, learning about how to collaborate with other providers to make sure that we were doing what was best as a full team to support the person that we were supporting. So it's just so great to be able to connect with someone who felt brave enough to be like, no, we're not going to stick with that. We're going to try something different, especially because it was different in a way that only served to benefit those that we were working with. And that's
hmm
cool.
well, and to serve a community, when I talk about public school that has a certain amount of money and it has to be spent this way to cover all of these kids. Well, that doesn't necessarily, and we know this, we could debate this for the rest of our lives, but we know that that doesn't necessarily give us the best results to for
Yeah.
that child, where to find that gifted part of them. And I spent a lot of minutes, extra minutes in my classroom, uh, doing some of the mundane stuff as fast as I could so I could do the stuff that really mattered with the kids later. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
and that piece that you touched on about how how you took it into your own hands in terms of like having to get through some of the mundane things to try to make it more engaging and more important for the kiddos that you were working with. I know that's a story of a life of a lot of teachers, right? Those even in
Mm-hmm.
this day and age where we're having to, use our own money to buy supplies for the kiddos because we don't have those funds provided by the schools. It can be really hard to be in that space. So I was curious, because you also talk about a lot in the book, like practical toolkits for inclusive environments. Can you give our listeners one thing that they could do this week at home or in the classroom that you feel like costs nothing or even next to nothing that can make a difference in making a space feel more inclusive?
Um, so I have a couple of things that are going to come out in my book that I talk about. But if I could give parents or I could give teachers a, advice, and I have to tell you, my mom taught school for 37 years, and it was kindergarten, but she started out in high school, and for the longest time she would say to me, and I worked in a middle school at the time, as I wasn't even teaching, I was doing something else, and she said, and middle school is like the toughest world in the whole on the whole planet. I mean, it's just and she said, I had to learn very very quickly, I didn't have to have the last word.
Mm,
And just think about how profound that is. You don't have to have the last word. And in schools right now, and and maybe even in some therapies and all kinds of places, we were going to get the last word. And you talked about that one time about how he was going to pick up those Legos. You were going to leave him there, and he was going to pick them up the next day. Well, that's having the last word.
yeah.
Yep.
And so profoundly, I say to parents, you don't have to have the last word. You're still the boss. You still make the choices. You can still frame it however you want to frame it and still come out with the results that you want.
Yep.
Mm.
And so I think that that's probably the one gift I'm going to give you about that is you don't have to have the last word. And so many times I come up against someone in my teaching who would come to my room because there was a disturbance and come in the classroom and say, now you stop doing that and you sit down or you go to the quiet room, and or override me when I wasn't saying or doing anything at that point. I was letting it calm. I mean, it has to ride up and come back down. It always does.
Always
Yes.
does.
Okay. And so I was letting it ride up, and the down part is where they need you the most. That's when you're loving and you say, it's okay. I
Yeah.
know you broke the chair, but it's going to be okay. There's another day, there's another chair.
Yeah.
And so again, if I had one thing that I would tell parents, it's you don't have to have the last word.
Which I think that's beautiful and actually ties in perfectly to another question that we have, which is
Uh-huh.
what is the most outdated piece of advice that well-meaning teachers are still giving? And what should they replace it with? Would you say it's of that similar
I would
philosophy?
say it's probably that similar thing, because there are so many, and it's, again, I'm not blaming. It's not necessarily all their fault, but I walked into this classroom and I gave this example of a fourth grade girl who didn't quite fit the norm, maybe. And she got into a very rigid classroom. Well, rigid wasn't what she needed. And we still have rigidness in our classrooms because we're trying to get through so much stuff that looks like testing, and so
Yeah.
many minutes of reading, and so many minutes of this and so many minutes of that, and we can't have reading during this block, even though it feels better to have it during that block, because that doesn't fit the schedule of the school and the PE and the lunch and all that stuff. And I think that we've created a very rigidness in
Yeah.
classrooms that doesn't fit the kids that are coming into those classrooms
Yeah.
I
on a regular
so agree.
basis. Do you see that still? Do you feel that? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely. And
yeah.
and especially in preschoolers and
Mhm.
kindergartners and even first graders. I think there was talk a long time ago about adding another grade onto high school so that they could get more credits, or like um things that they wanted to do. And I thought that's ridiculous. Where we need to add it is between preschool and kindergarten, or kindergarten and first grade, something in there that says kindergarten's still going to be where you play and you're going to learn social skills and you're
Yeah.
going to learn how to um, work, through your antecedents and your all of those things that you need work on, and somebody's going to be there to guide you through that learning,
Yeah.
because you're little bitty and you need that, and that's where it starts, and we could solve a lot of problems there.
Yeah.
And I think that that's
Completely
also
agree.
why we see so many of our kids in ABA thrive, right? Because I mean, if caveat, if it's done the right way,
Right.
is,
Right, right.
that they're thriving because we're designing schedules and routines that meet the needs that they have as an individual. And of course, when your needs are met and you're nurtured exactly as you are, you're going to grow, you're going to blossom, you're going to move on to developing all these new skills because someone is taking the time to give you a break every 5 minutes to stretch your body. Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe they are having you listen to music while you do your tasks because it doesn't really matter if music is playing in the background.
Right.
Your brain needs to be successful. And I think, you had said earlier, about that teacher who had kind of stopped everything to give attention to one
Mm-hmm.
kid. Sometimes that's what we need is the flexibility and the time to be able to give individualized attention because that serves the whole. And I think
Right.
that people miss that piece a lot is when you
Yeah.
when you're taking care of all the little pieces, they all work together to make a
Mm-hmm.
successful unit.
Right. And I think people misread sometimes that stop about what it shows and what learning message others are getting from it. You
Yeah.
know, I do think that it's really important for the other kids around us to see that we're all neurodiverse, and in our own what we all need to be receptive to the differences, and that when we look when we can stop judging those differences and see that we all have our own things, then we can be more accepting.